The galaxy, vast and unpredictable, had always been home to various species, each thriving in their own way. Some lived in peace, cultivating knowledge and prosperity, while others were embroiled in constant wars. The Trilaxians, a species of peaceful, highly intelligent beings, were one of the former. They inhabited a beautiful planet known for its lush forests, sparkling rivers, and expansive cities that seemed to blend effortlessly with nature. Their society was advanced, but not in the militaristic sense. They preferred to focus on scientific discovery, art, and the preservation of their environment. They had never known war, nor had they ever needed to. For centuries, they coexisted peacefully, their culture flourishing in ways that many other species could only dream of. But everything changed when a great and terrible force appeared on the outskirts of their system. The Obsidian Horde, a fearsome coalition of ruthless warlords from distant corners of the galaxy, arrived without warning. Known for their brutal tactics, the Horde had a singular goal: domination. They cared for nothing except conquering and leaving behind desolation. The Trilaxians, who had lived in harmony for so long, were utterly unprepared for the wrath of such a powerful enemy. The first attacks came from the skies, as the Obsidian fleet descended upon the peaceful Trilaxian cities. The massive warships, black as night and gleaming with an ominous light, unleashed deadly firepower that tore through the air, shredding the Trilaxian defenses. Their cities, which had once stood proudly, were reduced to smoking ruins in mere hours. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled under the sheer force of the invaders' bombardment. The Trilaxians fought back with whatever limited military they had, but it was clear that they were outmatched. The Horde's weapons were far more advanced, their tactics brutal and unforgiving. Trilaxian warriors, though courageous, were no match for the ferocity of the invaders. In a panic, the Trilaxians realized that they were fighting a losing battle. Destruction spread across their world, and their people were slaughtered without mercy. They had never known such fear or violence. The Trilaxian leaders gathered in their remaining strongholds, desperately trying to form a plan to fend off the Horde, but it became apparent that they could not win. Their only hope was to call for help. The Trilaxians, with no other choice, sent a distress signal across the galaxy, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would respond. The message was simple but urgent. "We are under attack. Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. We need help." They didn't expect much, knowing how the galaxy operated. How often those in power turned a blind eye to the suffering of others. But they had no other option. They knew their species, their way of life, was on the brink of annihilation. Far away, on Earth, the message reached the human leaders. Earth was known throughout the galaxy, not for kindness or compassion, but for its military might. Humanity had long since moved beyond the petty conflicts of its past. It had risen to become one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, its warships unmatched in strength and speed. But humans were not particularly known for their generosity. They were pragmatic, often willing to help only when it suited their own interests. They were not a species to engage in altruism without expecting something in return. When the message from the Trilaxians arrived, the Earth Council, a group of the planet's top leaders, quickly convened in an underground war room. The transmission from the Trilaxians flickered on the screens, showing their faces, desperate, filled with fear, their planet burning behind them. The urgency in their voices was undeniable. The Earth leaders listened, but there was a certain coldness in their eyes. The Trilaxians were pleading for help, yes, but the humans weren't moved by desperation alone. This wasn't a simple act of kindness that could be granted. It was a question of resources, strategy, and power. The Earth Council knew that the Obsidian Horde was a dangerous force, but they also understood the nature of the Trilaxian request. It wasn't just a plea for rescue, it was a cry for survival, for the chance to live on. In the end, the Earth leaders knew that if the horde was not stopped, it could continue to spread devastation across the galaxy. So, they decided to answer the call, but on their terms. Admiral Carter, the leader of Earth's military forces, stood before the council. His reputation as a fierce strategist and a hardened veteran of countless battles was well known. "We will help them," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "But we do it on our terms. If we are to intervene, we will take control of their world. The Tralaxians will not be left to rebuild on their own. We will help them, but they will owe us for their survival. That's the price." The council members exchanged glances. Some hesitated, unsure about the wisdom of such an aggressive approach, but others, especially those with military backgrounds, knew that it was the only way. They had seen the power of the Obsidian Horde firsthand, and they understood that if humanity was going to get involved, it needed to be with strength, not mercy. A mission of pure rescue would be too risky, and the cost of failure would be catastrophic. The Tralaxians' world would become a strategic asset to Earth, and that was something that could not be overlooked. The decision was made. The message was sent back to the Tralaxians. "We will help," the response read. "But understand this. Help comes at a price. We will protect your world, but in return, we will take control. This is no simple rescue mission. This is total war. If you want to survive, you will have to accept our terms." The Tralaxians, devastated and frightened, received the response with a mixture of disbelief and dread. They had asked for help, never imagining that the humans would demand control in return. Yet, faced with annihilation, they had no choice but to accept. Survival came at a steep cost, and their peaceful world would never be the same again. The silence that followed the response, the fate of the Tralaxians, was sealed. They would live, yes, but at the price of their freedom. The humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy would never forget how the Tralaxians had pleaded for help, and how humans had answered, not with aid, but with war. The response from Earth came quickly, and it was harsh. The Tralaxians, who had once lived in peace, now found themselves facing the undeniable truth. Their world would not be saved by kindness or compassion. The humans had agreed to help, but at a steep price. In their message, the humans made it clear that this would not be a simple rescue mission. The Tralaxians' planet would no longer be theirs to govern. In return for their survival, Earth would claim control, and their world would become part of humanity's expanding empire. The leaders of the Tralaxian Council gathered in what remained of their council chambers, their minds filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The enemy they faced was overwhelming, the Obsidian Horde unstoppable, and yet the humans had turned their plea for help into a business deal. The Tralaxians had no choice. Their cities were in ruins, their population dwindling, and their defenders were overwhelmed. The Horde's ships filled the skies, their weapons turning everything they touched into dust. It was the end of their peaceful existence, and no matter how hard they tried to resist, they understood the humans were their only hope, no matter what the cost. Reluctantly, they accepted the terms. The message sent back to Earth was one of sorrow and resignation. "We agree," it read. "Save us, and we will accept your terms." It was not a decision made out of respect, nor one born from a desire to give in. It was simply the last resort, the only way to ensure their people would survive. The Obsidian Horde was merciless, and with each passing day, their strength grew. Time was running out. The humans' response came swiftly. The Earth fleet, a towering presence of technological might, would arrive within a matter of days. The Tralaxians knew what that meant. It meant war, and not the kind of war they had ever imagined. The humans were not coming to save them. They were coming to conquer, and the force they were bringing would leave nothing to chance. The Tralaxians watched helplessly as their skies darkened with the appearance of the Earth warships, massive vessels that seemed to blot out the stars themselves. Admiral Carter's fleet entered the Tralaxian system without warning. The ships, sleek and deadly, moved in perfect formation, their engines humming with power. They were a symbol of humanity's might, a force unlike any the galaxy had seen. The Tralaxians had never seen anything like it. The ships were covered in advanced weaponry, each one a floating fortress capable of destroying entire fleets. The technology that powered them was far beyond anything the Tralaxians had ever developed. The fleet moved into position, and the first salvo was fired without hesitation. The Obsidian Horde, which had been closing in on the Tralaxian planet, suddenly found itself facing an unexpected enemy. The humans were not like the Tralaxians. They didn't fight with honor or mercy. They fought with total destruction, and they did so with precision and calculation. The humans fired their weapons, and the obsidian ships shattered under the relentless barrage. In a matter of hours, the obsidian fleet had been decimated, their mighty warships ripped apart by the superior firepower of Earth's military. Yet, this victory came with a price. As the humans wiped out the Horde, they did not stop. The fleet turned its attention to the Tralaxian cities, unleashing a torrent of firepower that flattened buildings and scorched the earth. The Tralaxians had asked for help, but they had never expected this kind of response. The humans were not interested in saving their cities. They were interested in showing their power. Every strike, every explosion, was a message. The Tralaxians' world had now been claimed. From the surface, the Tralaxian leaders watched in horror as their cities burned. They had never seen such destruction, and they had never imagined their world would become a battlefield. Their people, who had once known peace, now lived in fear, hiding from the chaos that rained down from above. The Tralaxians tried to communicate, but their messages were met with silence or cold indifference. The humans had made it clear. The time for negotiation was over. The Tralaxians were no longer in control. Admiral Carter watched the destruction from the command deck of his flagship. To him, this was not a war. This was simply the way of the universe. It was survival of the fittest, and humanity was strong. The Tralaxians had been weak, and now their planet would belong to Earth. The humans had done what they had promised. They had wiped out the Obsidian Horde. But in doing so, they had sent a message to the galaxy. This was how humans operated. They did not negotiate. They did not beg. They took what they wanted, and they did it with ruthless efficiency. The Tralaxians, meanwhile, were left in shock. They had survived, yes, but they had lost everything they held dear. Their cities were in ruins, their homes destroyed, and their people scattered. The Obsidian Horde had been a threat, but they had never imagined that their rescue would come at such a devastating cost. They had hoped for mercy, but all they had received was domination. The humans had offered their help, but it came with a price so steep that it seemed to erase the very meaning of survival. On the surface, the humans had achieved their goal. The Obsidian Horde was gone, and the Tralaxians had been forced into submission. But Admiral Carter knew that this victory was only the beginning. The Tralaxians would be left to rebuild, but they would do so under Earth's watchful eye. Humanity would now control the planet, its resources, and its future. The Tralaxians were no longer free. They had been saved, but at the cost of their independence. As the dust settled, the Tralaxian leaders were left to ponder their fate. They had pleaded for help, and the humans had answered. But the help had come in the form of war. Their world was no longer their own, and their peaceful existence was gone. The humans had delivered them from the Obsidian Horde, but at a price that no one could have foreseen. The galaxy would remember this day. The Trilaxians would never forget what it meant to beg for help, and how humanity had responded, not with aid, but with a new kind of conquest. The aftermath of the battle was both quiet and oppressive. The once thriving Trilaxian cities lay in ruins, their majestic structures reduced to smoldering heaps of rubble. The sky, which had once been a bright canvas of blue and white clouds, was now darkened with the smoke of destruction. The planet's environment, once a symbol of harmony and beauty, had been scarred by the violence brought on by the arrival of humanity. The Trilaxian people, who had never known the horrors of war, now faced a new, unrecognizable reality. The horde was gone, but it was a hollow victory. The humans, though they had defeated the invading force, had not spared the planet from their wrath. They had come as saviors, yes, but their salvation was one of domination. Admiral Carter, aboard his flagship, surveyed the damage from his command deck. The successful defeat of the Obsidian Horde had come at a staggering cost. The Trilaxians were no longer a free species. They had been reduced to vassals, their world now under the control of Earth. Earth's fleet had imposed a new order, and it was clear that their methods were anything but merciful. The devastation that had rained down upon the planet had not been an accident or a necessary evil. It was a statement. Earth had made its power known, and the message was unmistakable. The galaxy was under the control of humanity. It wasn't enough to simply stop the Horde. The humans needed to prove their dominance. The Trilaxians, though they had asked for help, had been forced into submission, their fate sealed by the very people who had saved them. On the surface, the Trilaxians were grateful for the defeat of the Obsidian Horde, but deep within their hearts, they could not escape the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. They had not asked for their planet to be taken over. They had not asked for their independence to be stripped away. They had simply needed help in their darkest hour. And now, as they looked to the heavens, they saw not stars, but the cold, unfeeling gaze of Earth's warships. They had exchanged one enemy for another, one form of subjugation for a different, more insidious kind. The Trilaxians now found themselves at the mercy of an empire that demanded loyalty, not out of compassion, but because it was the price of survival. As days turned into weeks, the humans' presence became more and more oppressive. Earth's soldiers patrolled the streets of the remaining cities, their presence a constant reminder of the new order. Earth's military bases were established on Trilaxian soil, and the once independent species was now expected to follow Earth's commands. The Trilaxians were given no choice. They could rebuild their cities, yes, but only under the watchful eyes of Earth's soldiers. They could restore their economy, but it would be humanity that would benefit most from the planet's resources. The Trilaxians had survived, but at the cost of everything that had once made them unique. Their peaceful existence had been shattered, and now they lived under the shadow of a powerful empire that saw them as nothing more than a subjugated people. Admiral Carter, too, began to feel the weight of the situation. Though he had won the sea battle, the victory left him with a sense of emptiness. The Trilaxians had been saved, but at a price that made him question the true nature of what they had done. He had been a soldier, trained to think in terms of strategy and conquest, but now he was forced to consider the consequences of his actions. Had the defeat of the Horde truly been worth the destruction that had been wrought on the Trilaxians? Was this the kind of empire humanity should build? A galaxy dominated by force, with no room for compassion or cooperation? These questions gnawed at him, but he knew there was no turning back. The deed had been done. The Trilaxians were now under Earth's control, and they would stay there unless something extraordinary happened. For the Trilaxians, life had become a harsh reality. There were those among them who still clung to hope, believing that one day their planet would be free again. They dreamed of resistance, of rallying against the human occupiers, of regaining their independence. But as time passed, The weight of their situation wore heavily on their spirits. They had no military to speak of, no allies in the galaxy willing to stand with them. The Obsidian Horde had been a real threat, but they were now a distant memory. What remained was Earth's unyielding presence, and the Trilaxians had no choice but to obey. Despite the subjugation, however, the Trilaxians did not lose their identity entirely. They adapted, though they did so with a sense of bitterness. The cultural institutions that had once been the pride of their people were now controlled by Earth's officials. The universities, the art galleries, and the scientific centers were all subject to Earth's scrutiny. The Trilaxians still held on to their traditions, but their expressions of culture were limited to what Earth allowed. For the first time in their history, they were forced to live in a world dictated by another species. Humanity, for its part, carried on as if nothing had changed. Earth's citizens did not see the Trilaxians as equals. To them, the Trilaxians were simply another species to be controlled, another world to be exploited. They had saved the Trilaxians from the Obsidian Horde, and in return, they expected total obedience. The human leadership saw the occupation as a necessary step in securing the galaxy. The galaxy was vast, but humanity's reach was now spreading, and they were determined to show that Earth would not be challenged. Their victory over the Horde was merely the beginning. The galaxy would now understand the consequences of crossing Earth. The Trilaxians would serve as a reminder to anyone who dared defy humanity's power. As the months went by, the Trilaxians began to realize that they had made a tragic bargain. They had exchanged their freedom for survival. But in doing so, they had lost more than they had ever imagined. The price of their continued existence had been their identity, their way of life, and the future of their children. They were no longer masters of their destiny. They were subjects in a galaxy that had been reshaped by humanity's ambition. The warships still lingered in the sky, a permanent reminder of what had been lost. The once beautiful world of the Trilaxians would never be the same. The humans had come with promises of salvation, but in the end, the price had been more than they could have ever imagined. The galaxy now stood at a crossroads. Earth had shown that it was willing to use its power to dominate, and the Trilaxians were left to contemplate the harsh truth that their plea for help had been the beginning of their enslavement. The galaxy would remember how the Trilaxians had begged for help, and how humanity had answered, not with kindness, but with total war. The lesson was clear. Survival could come at a far steeper cost than anyone could imagine.